Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning into the Art of Intervention Project, a resource for families and professionals. And today I get the privilege to sit down and talk to, and our viewers get the privilege to listen to and get to know you, Burr Cook. And you've been doing interventions for a while. So why don't you give people kind of a quick intro of who is Burr Cook, and then we'll get into kind of the content of what we're going to cover in the podcast.
Sure. Hi everyone. I'm Burr Cook, and I do interventions. I also do individual and family counseling, and I run a family recovery workshop weekly here in my community. It's a free resource for the community. So I'm doing a lot of work with families, with addicts, and all moving in the direction towards recovery.
And I know you have a huge heart for families, but give people an idea, like, what is an intervention? People hear this word and they think a million things, but how would you boil it down to like a couple sentences on what is an intervention?
Well, an intervention is inserting a solution into a problem. For what we're talking about, it's a structured process to help an individual get treatment and help a family begin the process of healing from the impact of addiction.
Yeah, and how would you describe addiction? Like, what is addiction in your words?
Well, classically, it's a brain disease. It's a brain disease that has physiologic, emotional, spiritual components to the disease, but it's basically a progressive illness that for all intents and purposes sneaks up on people. I've never met anybody that wanted to be an addict, but I've met thousands of addicts, and none of them thought they were going where they were going.
Most definitely. Yeah, I mean, it's we get astray, and then all of a sudden it ends up being completely opposite of what we thought we were going in this too. So so we go from addiction to recovery. And so what do you think of when you think of recovery? How would you describe that?
Well, recovery is it's a remedial program of physical, emotional, spiritual, character development. It's an action. It's a series of actions that hopefully never ends. It's a process that is different from sobriety or abstinence. I like to characterize it as abstinence is the ticket, but recovery is the movie. You got to have the ticket to get into the movie.
There you go.
But recovery is what happens hopefully after abstinence.
And you've been doing
sense?
Oh, it totally does, 100%. Yeah, because you've been doing interventions, or let's just say you've been helping families for how long would you say you've been doing this?
Well, yeah, I actually started helping families back in the mid-1980s. I started my career in healthcare as a nurse, and for a period of time, about 5 years, I worked in neurological rehab, primarily with patients that were in what we call the coma vigil. So comatose patients for a variety of reasons: drug overdoses, closed head injuries, near drownings, things like that. We had these patients for a long time, which meant we had their families for a long time. And over time, within that first 6 months of working there, I noticed that a lot of the family systems were deteriorating. These families had somebody they loved that was progressively getting worse. It was an illness they couldn't control. And it affected the system in a lot of negative ways. And some families, more so than others, were having a difficult time coping. So I started talking with these families at first individually, and then getting them together so they could kind of share what they were going through with each other. And it was there that I saw the value of peer support.
Okay.
Families. And throughout my career as a nurse, I was kind of the go-to guy when it came to families. It's, hey, Burr, I got this family, they're really losing it. Could you go talk to them? And that pretty much evolved into when there was a family that was upset or needed some education, I was the one they called, and typically for crisis intervention. when I started working in the addiction field, I'm around families, and it was like, wow, I know these families. You know, this feels comfortable and familiar. And so started working with families in the addiction field. And of course, I went back to school, became a counselor, and really got involved in family systems, which has helped tremendously for the intervention work I do.
Yeah, most definitely. And you've seen things a long way. So in the process, you help people get into treatment and working with the families, which we'll get into those details here in a second. But how would you describe maybe someone that's transformed through this process? Because you're not just a guy that gets in, does the intervention, and gets out. But
Right.
how would you describe kind of maybe a transformed life from addiction to like, wow, they're really in this new world right now?
Well, yeah, I think that's probably the most gratifying part of the work we do is seeing an individual change, seeing the lights come on, if you will, as they start to take more and more responsibility for their life, and have thoughts, attitudes, and behaviors
Right.
evolve into more selflessness and more purpose than where they were coming from in their addiction. It's an evolutionary process, this transformation, and I've seen it in just so many individuals, and not just them, but their families as well. But for the addict in particular, it's I can't tell you how many times I'll be talking to somebody I did an intervention on years ago, and just say, "Wow, this is not the same person I met. They have really completely changed."
Yeah, and those are the beautiful things when you see a life change along the way. So tell people a little bit about maybe like what benefit would you say you get out of doing intervention? Like why do you do these interventions? What's is it stem from your heart? I know because I've talked to you several times, but like why do you even do them? They're hard. It's draining, right?
Actually, they're not hard for me. It's not my crisis. I want to be compassionate, and I'm dealing with crises all the time. But but that's kind of where I came from in my career. If you think about it, I was a nurse from the time I was 21, helping people. And the idea is you've got somebody ill in front of you, and you're doing what you can to get them to health, and that's been very helpful in dealing with addictions. Somebody's got a brain disease. There's a lot more to it than that, but it's kind of what I do and have been doing for 40 years is helping people get better. And within that, there's a lot of education that takes place. There's a lot of guidance. There's a lot of support. Having gone through, and being in my own recovery has been helpful. And I learn from everybody I've worked with. As you know, every intervention has a life of its own, and each intervention is filled with learning opportunities from both the addict and the family. So that's gratifying too.
Yeah, how does someone get it? Like, how does someone get trained? You just mentioned education, but what is kind of an education realm for someone to get into this kind of field to do it well? Because
Sure.
today's day and age, a lot of people are just getting into it and they're going, and training is probably different than it was back then. But like, how are ways people get trained to be an interventionist?
Okay. So we have a little bit of time here.
Yeah. This is just conversation, so we're good.
So working in the treatment field, I would get phone calls from a family member saying, we've got our son, he's using heroin, and we really want him to get help, but he's not interested in getting help. And I'd say, well, why don't you bring him down to my office? Bring the whole family, and we'd have a meeting and find some place for this guy to go. And I was being introduced to the addiction field and starting to go to conferences. And I went to a conference, I'm going to say 2003, that was about interventions. And there were interventionists there speaking, and they were talking about the different models they use. And so I'm sitting in this conference saying, well, I do this several times a week.
Right.
I'm going to find out more about what they're doing. And so I started looking into the different models. And of course, the classic model is the Johnson model developed by Vernon Johnson. And that's that, what initially was probably a confrontational model where the family gets together and write letters and tries to kind of emotionally lever somebody into treatment. That's evolved into a more compassionate carefrontational model. But that's one of the classic models. And then I was introduced to Judith Landau. She developed
the Arise intervention.
The Arise intervention model. So I trained with her. I liked the invitational piece to that. In doing the classic Arise, I found that I really didn't have to go to 3 levels. Generally, in that first or second level that is within the Arise model, people were going into treatment. I liked the continued engagement piece with the family on that. And then I was most attracted to the systemic model that initially I met a man named Bill Maher, and he was working with Wayne Rader and a few other people on this workshop model. Systemic model, the intervention is on the family system. The family is the identified patient, and that included the addict. And I really liked the way that intervention was laid out. It was a really low stress model. Again, it was invitational. We're inviting somebody to participate. And it's conducted over either a long day or 2 days, with the result that everybody in the family got a treatment plan. And that really spoke to me, because I'd been working with families long enough to know that everybody was ill, so to speak, from the impact this had on them. So it made sense that everyone would get a treatment plan. And we saw, with that model, what I noticed personally is that we had less people leaving against medical advice. In other words, they would complete their treatment stay, usually go on to a longer continuum of care. And with the family following their treatment plan, we just kept seeing better and better outcomes. So that's really, and as you know, every interventionist ultimately does their own thing, right? That is just, it's a mix of their education, their skill, talent, and experience. So I really draw from those 3 models and use different components. And the systemic model is not appropriate for every family. There are circumstances where you need to get in there and you need to have the family read letters and so forth. So I think that's where the importance of a real thorough assessment comes in prior to doing the intervention, to determine what model you think is going to work best with that family.
Yeah. So what is that initial intake call? We'll call it intake call, but the initial
Sure.
call. So a family calls you. How do you figure out if they even need an intervention?
Well, so one of my initial questions is goes something like this: when you've expressed your concerns to your loved one, how do they respond? And occasionally you'll hear, well, we haven't said anything to them yet or her yet. And so I'll suggest, why don't you do that first, because you may not need an intervention. But usually if you have a history of a family wanting someone to get help and a lot of resistance to that, a lot of denial and resistance to that, that's usually appropriate for an intervention. It's, interventions are to help motivate treatment-resistant individuals.
Yeah, treatment-resistant individuals. I mean, I've done a few interventions just over coffee along the way, but
yeah, absolutely.
So the family calls in, and because I know people that are tapping in this resource are just saying, hey, we know we need to use an intervention. So explain what the process looks like from the moment they make that phone call to leading up to the day of the intervention. And then we'll get into because treatment options and stuff like that too. But what could a family expect in this process?
Well, in that first phone call, you want to be compassionate. This whoever's calling you has been through a lot. It's gotten to the point where they're reaching out for help. So they've hit some sort of bottom. And so, I want to use a lot of compassion, and I want to engender some trust in this, So I'm usually real transparent, really open, and really kind of want to get to a brief overview of the facts. I don't want to do an extensive assessment in that first phone call. I want to establish need for the intervention, resources, and not just financial resources, but is this family willing to be committed to a process? Helping a family understand that this isn't an event. I'm not going to come in there and fix your loved one or walk out the door 30 minutes later taking someone to treatment. This is a process that's going to involve some education and a willingness to follow some direction, so that when we do sit down, I'm sitting down with a different family than the one that called me initially. So for that to take place, once we've agreed to work together, we sign a contract that outlines my responsibilities and their responsibilities, and we'll do a formal assessment. Now, in the assessment, I like to talk to everyone that might be involved in the intervention. I'm not sure they're going to be involved. That's part of the assessment process too. But I'll ask the family, who does this person love? Who do they respect? Who loves and respects this person? Let's get a team together. Always want to include friends in that, if that's possible. It's always great to have an employer, especially if it's a man you're intervening on. We'll get this team together, and then I'll ask people individually. I don't do an assessment with a whole family in front of me. I tend to get more information, especially about family dynamics, when I'm talking to someone individually. So I'll ask them a series of questions and get the basic questions out of the way first. History of drug use, types of drugs, length of use, previous attempts at treatment, try to get a medical history, psychiatric history, find out whether or not they've been professionally diagnosed with any psychiatric or mental illness, get a list of medications they're currently taking, get a general state. I want to get some safety concerns out of the way and find out, is this person getting up and going to work every day, but they're using is impacting them? Or is it somebody that you periodically have to make sure they're breathing? Do I need to speed up or slow down, if you will? Typically, more often than not, I want to slow a family down and get them out of crisis mode. When a family's in crisis mode, the addict's got that wired. Addicts do well when their family's on the ropes, and so they like to escalate the crisis because they get their way more often. And so I tend to want to slow a family down. But I'll get a history of from each individual I'm talking to. And of course, a friend is going to have some different information than a family member usually. Also want to do a genogram. Every intervention I do, I'll actually do a genogram it really helps me kind of put into place not only what's going on in this family, relationships, a history of traumas, and chemical dependencies, history of mental illness, but it also gives me a generational history of what's been going on generationally in this family. That's where we see a lot of this, a lot of generational trauma and generational stress that we want to be able to address somewhere in that treatment plan they're going to have. And then look at, the kids, who stands to lose if this family or this individual doesn't get help. I have found the genogram to be very powerful during the intervention process, to be able to sit down and put this in front of somebody. It's color-coded with the different afflictions and so forth, and say, this isn't just about you. This has been going on for generations, and down here, we've got kids here, and part of this is making sure that it doesn't go any further than this. There's a moral obligation, for upcoming generations to do the best we can, and that usually will resonate with people.
I can imagine light bulbs are going off left and right
Oh,
for
sure.
family members. Like, I never knew Uncle Billy was that, or Aunt Carol, or
Absolutely.
whatever it was. I'm sure they're just, especially the kids, that it's not talked about, and they get to
Right.
see this and color coded, as you said, and it's like, I never knew that. So it's preparing them for the future.
Right. It also puts it in a context that helps to ameliorate the shame that they're dealing with, because it's, with an addict, when they're in the midst of their disease, it's all about them, right? But being able to see that, wow, this has been going on. And like you said, I didn't know that that's what was going on with Uncle Billy. They kind of see how this is, maybe it's not necessarily their fault they have a disease, but certainly they have a responsibility to do something about it and bring that home too. So I'll do a genogram, get a real thorough assessment. Now, what that, as I'm talking to people, getting that assessment, I'm also finding out what their availability is going to be. How, when and where they're going to be able to show up. Without question, for me, the hardest part of any intervention is getting everyone to show up at the same time. Everyone's got busy lives today, and sometimes you're bringing people in from different parts of the country or the world. And so getting as many people as possible to show up at the same time is important. So I'll get that information in the assessment as well. And then what that assessment's going to do is help us decide which model to use, who should be participating, who shouldn't, and why. Where we're going to do the intervention, where it's going to be most appropriate, when we're going to do the intervention, and what are going to be our initial treatment recommendations, based on the assessment I've done, what's going to be clinically, financially, geographically appropriate for this person. And then we'll, in that process, before we sit down, we'll narrow down a treatment selection, so that on the day or days of the intervention, we know what's coming next. We know which treatment center we're going to use. We've got all the logistics in place. The last thing you want to do is have a meeting with someone and say, so we want you to get help, and they say great, and we say we'll get back to you.
Yeah.
While we figure out the next part. No, you want to have all your ducks in a row. So it's a speedy process. Whether you're doing a Johnson model surprise intervention or a invitational intervention, the addict's going to be thrown off a little bit, and they really need a lot of support at this time. It's a lot of shame is going to be coming up for them, even though you're trying your best not to have this be a shaming process. That's going to happen naturally, and it's going to be an emotional time for everybody. So you want to have someone there that can be compassionate, that can create an environment where everybody is able to have some dignity in this process, and have it be a loving, respectful process, but one that needs to begin.
Yeah.
So that's kind of it in a nutshell. I'm sure there's, you probably have some questions, but that's basically, how we do this. As far as how quickly we can set this up, again, I tend to want to slow families down a little bit, especially if they're extremely anxious and want to do it yesterday. There's a lot of reasons not to do it, tomorrow, because we're not prepared. We haven't planned, and planning and preparation is very important for this. You can't over-plan and over-prepare. Families tend to second-guess a lot. What if? And they've been doing that for a long time. And so you want to bring them out of that mode and just really, kind of stabilize the situation with appropriate plans and appropriate recommendations. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it completely does. And I know we lead up to the day of the actual intervention, but give people kind of an idea of, you talked about treatment options. How do you vet a treatment center yourself? Like, what is a good program, and
Sure.
how many options do you typically give a family?
I tend not to. I certainly won't give them more than 3. Whenever possible, give them 2. Because again, they'll overthink it, and we know that so much of the experience you're going to have in treatment is dependent on you and your ability to take direction. There's some great treatment centers out there. So again, is this place licensed? What's the quality of the staff? Is the staff professionally licensed? What's the average level of education among the clinicians? What does the meat of the program look like? Is there individual therapy? Is there groups and process groups? I really like experiential therapies a lot. I think they go a long way. What's the length of the program? Typically, especially with this opiate crisis, 28-day programs aren't cutting it for the average young adult opiate user. They're needing a longer-term level of care. What sort of services does the treatment center provide that are essential? Detox, residential treatment. Do they have an intensive outpatient program where this person can go through the intense part of treatment in the residential program and then move on to less supervision, more personal responsibility? Are they going to be able to help us with sober livings when the person gets out of the residential piece? How long can they ostensibly stay there? And what do they actually treat? There's been a big history of places that are trying to make money, and if you can't make money, you don't have a mission. So you got to make money, but are they who they say they are? That's really important to an interventionist. If they say they treat eating disorders, what does that eating disorder program look like? What sort of support is in there? How is it structured to treat eating disorders? Things like that. Is a dual diagnosis program? Well, what does that mean? Certainly it needs to be more than medication management. And so you'll just look at the different components of a program. Personally, I like to visit the program before I send somebody there. Occasionally, I haven't had a chance to go look at it. I often will encourage families to go and see the place, see where their loved one's going to be, meet the people that will be treating them, get a sense of the program. What sort of accreditations does the program have? Are they running on minimum standards, or are they running on standards that are of a much higher level, like a JACO accredited facility? You've got, those are maximum standards. And so, who is this treatment center? And I like to talk to the owners and find out what the impetus was for starting a treatment center and get a sense of them. More often than not, you want a state licensed place. On the one hand, you'll want them to work with insurance because that's helpful for the families resource-wise. And on the other hand, you're hoping there's enough resources to pick up the ball when the insurance company drops it, and they usually do. So, what's going to happen there? But I'll be honest with you. I was talking to a guy yesterday. He's got a place out in Texas, and he's not licensed. And he has some licensed people working for him, but they don't run a typical program. It's a complete community model, social model recovery, and I have found that to be incredibly successful with a lot of individuals. So they're not accredited by any supervising agency or standard oversight type of place. They're not licensed by the state. They're for the most part, their support staff, if you will, is not licensed or credentialed. It's just a community model where character development is a big piece, immersion in the 12-step model is a big piece. And I have found a lot of those to be extremely successful with some of my clients. So there's such a breadth of what's available and what's out there. I could go on forever, about this, but I like people that are doing creative things and not stuck on a one-size-fits-all type model. I tend to stay away from larger facilities, 250-bed facility. Addicts are experts at staying under the radar, slipping through cracks, and So really big places I tend not to look at too much, and certainly not look at the smaller ones. You know, if you have a 2-bed facility, I don't know. I'm not feeling real good about that.
Yeah, 2 bed, 125,000 a month. They're
Yeah,
doing
there
great.
you go. Yeah, we only need to fill 2 beds,
Yeah,
right?
it's a private bedroom and it's a beautiful house in the mountains. And that's what I want people to hear is the importance of actually using an interventionist, someone in the field that knows good treatment and bad treatment. Because you call some of these numbers out there, these 1-800 numbers, and it's just they're just slotting you into the next bed so they can get
Absolutely.
paid 5 or 8 grand just to shoot someone there. So using someone like you is,
Hmm.
I've been there. I've talked to the owners. I've been
Sure.
in the program. It's good, and here's why. They're coming to you and for your expertise and your wisdom.
Right, exactly. You know, and you just mentioned this, Rob. It is really important to get an interventionist that is independent, truly independent, and not being paid by treatment center. Addicts and their families are so vulnerable, and if they don't understand the treatment and recovery world, they can be taken advantage of. We've all heard, we know of lots of stories of that. So it's really important that they have someone they can trust that is independent of a treatment center, that is going to make some referrals for treatment that are clinically appropriate, that are a good fit, and to help the family in that pros and cons decision when you get down to 2 treatment centers. Deal with the pros and cons, and you're already starting the recovery process for families who would like to do everything perfectly, and that's not going to happen. There's really good places out there, and we want everyone to have a great experience. But just finding the absolute 100% perfect center to any family's thinking is they're going to be second guessing a lot. So you want to have the most important components there in the treatment center. The primary things you're worried about. We don't want to worry about whether they have to walk a half a mile to the gym versus have a gym in their room. Things like that are not that important.
Yeah, the amenities part
The amenities.
of treatment, and that's the thing. They're going away to get help. And before we kind of get to, I think, like the day of the intervention, also we think of addictions and intervening on things. I mean, we have substance abuse, so substance use disorder, eating disorders, gambling, sex, gaming is now a big one now too.
Yeah.
How do you address those when people call you? Are there things that you won't intervene on?
Sure. Yeah. Typically, I don't intervene on eating disorders. If eating disorder is primary, typically I will refer that out. It's not my thing. And there are people much more qualified than me to not only be effective during the intervention, but be more effective in laying out a continuum of care for this individual and family. I can make referrals sometimes because I know of some great places out there, but I'm just not the expert in that. Gambling, there's not a lot of resources out there. There should be a lot more resources for gamblers. I have done gambling interventions, but rarely. The reality is by the time you get called to do a gambling intervention, there's no money left in the family to hire an interventionist. So generally, you're just really pointing them towards resources. And if that's a component of a person's illness, maybe they're drinking and gambling, is the treatment center going to be able to address that? Are they going to be able to get this person to some GA meetings, things like that? And that's another thing I look at, because we see so many cross addictions and afflictions out there. Is the facility going to be able to deal with that, at least to a substantial part of it? Because again, what you do when you leave treatment is going to be the most important thing for this person. And so I want to know how well that treatment center is going to prepare them foundationally for the next part of the journey. When I was first starting out professionally in the intervention field, I really saw a lot of this kind of go in there, grab this person, fly them to a treatment center, and they were done at that point. They went on to the next intervention, and a lot of those interventions didn't work out well, and to my thinking, weren't handled appropriately, because we know that not only is this disease chronic, the recovery process is chronic, and what I have found is that families and individuals need a lot of guidance and support throughout the process. You know, there's this thing called the trauma of recovery. And it's, you know, this family has learned to do a dance a certain way within the addictive process and the co-addictive process. And they know that dance, but they don't know the recovery dance. And of course, we want more people in the family doing that dance individually. And so I think it's part of my responsibility to be there to not only educate them that they're going to need to do that, but to guide and support them and have that patience and understanding, that willingness to hold their hand, you know, for the steps forwards and for the steps backwards, which there always are in recovery. You know, recovery is one of those. It's kind of like this, you know, it's more of a winding road than a straight line from A to B.
Most definitely. And
Yeah.
so here we are. We've prepared that your family's hired you. You've vetted it. You figured out what treatment options. You're ready for the day of the intervention. So
Mhm.
tell people what to expect that day from not only what happens in the meeting, but the person decides to go or not to go. What happens then?
Sure. Okay. Well, there's going to be a series of things that I'll do in the systemic intervention, and it would be kind of hard to explain all of them. Some of them are very experiential. Use some sculpting things, but I use some sociometry initially in the family. We're going to do some introductions. I usually like to kind of bring everyone up to speed, because I've been talking to them individually. I've been talking to them as a group. In the invitational process, there comes a point in time, usually there's some bucking and snorting when the person's first invited, but if you set up that invitation correctly, you know, they're going to generally come to that meeting. But the great thing about this systemic model is the addict doesn't have to be there, and they'll end up going to treatment anyway because of the significant changes taking place in the system. But we'll do some introductions, and I really like to bring this anxiety down, allow some spontaneity to increase, and kind of have a laid back approach to this. I mean, we're serious about treatment. We're serious about recovery, but we don't need the tension. It's just not helpful. And so create an environment where people are more relaxed and go through the things I'm going to do that are specific to this family. You know, some of the sculpting exercises I might do, or certainly the education. You know, if am I dealing with an adolescent? You know, I'm going to talk about the disease a little bit differently than the adolescent. I use some PowerPoint explanations of what's going on in the brain. We talk about the family dynamics, how they have changed, and we get a little bit into the benefits of treatment and recovery, and we have this plan. And there's an agreement among everyone there that they're going to follow this plan, and hopefully an agreement with the addict as well. And then we're going to implement the plan and help this person get into treatment. Now that's, you know, there may be a treatment center down the street. There may be one across the country that we're going to fly to. Typically, I like to go with my clients, but occasionally it's better for a family member to go with them. Occasionally, clients are perfectly, that IP, that the addict is perfectly capable of getting on a plane and getting there themselves. So again, it's a little bit different for each family. But safety is always our number one concern. And there's a lot of things in that assessment that we're going to go through to make sure that it's going to be a safe process, particularly if there's been a history of domestic violence, or I had an intervention one time. I wanted to make sure all the guns were out of the house, and because there'd been a lot of emotional chaos and a lot of stuff going on, and family assured me all the guns were out of the house, and we did the intervention, and the guy was ready to go to treatment, and I was taking him to this treatment center about 800 miles away, and we were going to fly there, and I said, wow, you've got your bag packed already, huh? And the bag was full of guns sitting there during the intervention. And,
Oh, wow.
And I was just blown away because the family had assured me, no, all the guns are gone. Well, that's where they went, into his bag. And, so that was a little disconcerting. You want to try to prevent that stuff from happening. But safety is a big concern. And we'll get this person to treatment. Now you ask, what if the person doesn't go? If there was a moral imperative to do the intervention doesn't stop. You just re-strategize. And within that systemic model, if the family is following direction, again, the systemic's not for every family, but if that family is following direction, that person will usually go into treatment within a few days or weeks, because the addiction can no longer be sustained in a recovering system. And so we just re-strategize. Somebody's going to go to treatment. We're going to debrief a little bit, and everybody's got a plan to follow. And I think it means a lot to the addict to know that the family's going to be doing their part too. There's nothing an addict hates worse than having a family member overly preoccupied with them. And I think it's a little bit comforting to know that somebody has their own program to work, and will be doing that within the process.
It does bring a lot of comfort knowing that the problem is not them, and it's the whole, like you said, the system. And I think it's important for families to understand that too, is like, you got to take an internal look at yourself, because you'll talk to families, right? And they go, well, my husband's been this way for 15 years and it's all his fault. And then my first thought is, well, you've been there for 15 years also.
Sure.
So let's look at everyone's kind of part there too. And
that's part of the healing process too, is being able to take responsibility for my part without beating ourselves up, understanding that this is really how the dynamics work in an addictive system, that's been organized around this stuff. And that's very typical. That's where I like families getting involved in peer support. They find out they're not alone, and other people have made mistakes, and other people feel responsibility where there may be none, and there's similar problem, similar solution. So that's a powerful thing in the healing process for families.
Yeah, most definitely it is. So now we're going to look beyond the individual's gone to treatment. They get the help they need. They're getting ready to come back home, because you are go somewhere.
Yeah,
within the plan.
Depends on the circumstances.
Right.
Sure.
So if the family's done the work and healed, and it's a safe environment, that could work. So what could it look like beyond like the prescribed initial treatment plan to then move forward to stepping down?
Yeah. So in more cases than not, even when we're talking about a spouse, I like to see a slow reintegration into the family, because this person's just getting their feet wet in early recovery. And early recovery is still, in a family system going through early recovery, there's still a lot of tension. There's still a lot of mistrust. Things can still seem chaotic. People are a little bit more reactive, less responsive, and so forth. While that person's been in treatment, I like to be working with the family and get them started on their own recovery plan. As this person gets out of the residential piece of treatment, I usually like a step down, even if it's a husband or a wife. I usually like them to go into sober living for a while. It could be anywhere from 30 days to 6 months, depending on the individual. Certainly with a young adult, 20, 25-year-old heroin addict, I typically don't like them to go home. It's there's this thing called individuation, and it's a normal part of growth and development, and that process has usually been retarded, or it's been held back, and so we have a lot of people staying in the home, when it hasn't been healthy. So I like to see this slow reintegration, somebody going and doing an intensive outpatient program, and living in a sober living, and getting a part-time job that's not too stressful, but allows them to kind of get back into a routine and take on some responsibilities. Stress is the leading cause of relapse. It just is. And so we want to be attentive to what's stressful, and what's overly stressful, and then what's just really good challenges within our goal setting. I'm a big fan of struggle with young adults, having to kind of work for their recovery, and take responsibility for their lives, and without the enabling going on. That's where I think we're going to see healthier internalized self-esteem and confidence come from. A lot of families these days just really don't want their kids to struggle, and yet we've all struggled, and we're wired for struggle. It's a part of the growth and development piece for us all, and I don't think we should be denying young people the dignity of having their struggle and overcoming those challenges, as long as it's not too tough. It's we don't want to set anybody up for failure either. So that's where that guidance and support is really important with families.
Yeah, today's day and age of participation ribbons with kids instead of letting them experience, first, second, third. I mean, that whole kind of that mentality, bringing people up in that world. Another thing I think important people to hear, like, so in the intervention world, how do you protect yourself from that with insurance or stuff like that too? What does that look like?
Yeah, so it's just generally malpractice insurance that I think every interventionist should have. So you have malpractice insurance, and being an ethical interventionist is really going to help you never have to be involved in litigation. Okay, there are some red flags. You learn a lot over the years, and occasionally you may start to do an initial assessment and see that for one reason or another, maybe a variety of reasons, this could actually become something that's has some risk to it, financially and reputationally, some risk to it, and you may choose not to, or to refer to somebody else. I've never been involved in any litigation. Hopefully it will never have to be, but that's where being an ethical interventionist and doing a really thorough assessment, knowing the family that you're working with, that helps.
Most definitely it does.
Yeah.
So what are some top
I've heard
questions?
some horrible stories out there.
Oh yeah.
Just so grateful I haven't been involved in any of that.
Yeah, I've definitely heard some doozies in the time I've been in the field as well, which definitely is not as long as you have, and that's why I wanted to get your wisdom and expertise in this. So a family's listening, and I like to kind of think of, like, what are some top questions a family should ask you, the interventionist,
Sure.
to make sure you're a guy that can help them. But what are some top questions they should be thinking about?
Well, I think they want to. They should know if you're experienced. Anybody can hang out a shingle and call themselves an interventionist. Are you experienced? Are you credentialed? Are you licensed? What's your background? What sort of training have you had? What's your philosophy on interventions? A lot of what families are what's really going to go on is that they're gonna start to go with their gut on a person. It's very important that the family that you're working with or business that you're working with trusts you, because at the end of the day, you're going to be giving a lot of direction out, and with the expectation that direction is going to be followed. So having a trusting relationship is very important. Do you trust your interventionist? But what sort of model do they prefer to use and why? Will give a family a sense of someone. Again, licensure, credentials, are those licenses and credentials up to date? And see, lots of people will say, "What's your success rate?" We get those questions, and I always think I'm 100% successful because I did exactly what I was said I was going to do in preparing a family and an individual for treatment.
And that is important for people to hear, because their idea, a lot of people's ideas is success for us is my guy goes to treatment and gets help. For them,
Right.
that's success when they come into it. But when they
Sure.
start understanding that the success is to change the family system,
Right. Right.
to me,
Yeah.
that's successful intervention. Is I've helped the family change their family system, whether the guy goes to treatment or not. The family now understands, okay, this is all of us deal. And if
Right.
we can change our system, then that's going to move our loved one towards getting help. Like you said, a couple days, a couple weeks, a month or two later.
Sure. Sure. Yeah, and I agree with that. When I first started doing interventions, I kind of had this sense that, oh wow, it's my job to get this guy into treatment. And then I realized, after a while, that actually it's his job to get himself into treatment. I'm going to be there to make it a good day and to create an environment where they can do that without shame or pride getting in the way, and make sure they get to an appropriate place, and that the family gets the help they need while they're in treatment, because that's a big deal. And I think that's another question, Rob, back to what should a family be looking for is um, how long are you involved in this process with us? Are we ever going to hear from you after the intervention? What does that look like? Very important piece. Now, some interventionists will structure this in a couple different ways. They'll say, well, it costs this much to do an intervention, and then this much for the family case management after the intervention. Other interventionists like myself just combine it. I don't want a family to have to choose between, putting somebody into treatment and whether or not they're going to do the very important secondary piece. That should be, to my thinking, be a part of the package. So often a family is so preoccupied with getting somebody into treatment, they're not really worried about all that stuff after. But all that stuff after is what we do to make sure this is the last treatment center they ever have to go to, right? And so I'll combine all that. What I tell families is that I'm not going to put a time limit on how long I work with you. I'm going to be able to continually provide education, guidance, and support for as long as you need me, to get you so you don't need me, as long as you're taking direction. If you're not taking direction, there's going to come a time where I'm going to say there's really no point in us working.
Do you have past clients that are willing to share their experience with new potential clients and say, here's our experience we had with Burr?
Sure. Yeah, sure. I think that's always helpful as far as that trust piece. The other thing is, Rob, the word of mouth that you get, from people that have talked to somebody you've already helped. That's great when that happens, because a lot of that trust is already in there. They've heard from the family firsthand, all these wonderful things about you and stuff. So you've already got some trust there. But sure, I think being able to do that to an extent. I mean, we've got to be discreet, and we've got to have privacy considerations, and certainly a lot of us have done interventions on people where there's a lot of notoriety and so forth, and we tend not to use those as references because of the potential fallout. So, um, but yeah, occasionally somebody will ask, and I don't generally put it out there. Hey, you can talk to this person, so forth. But if somebody asks, is there somebody I can talk to? I'll try to find someone recently, and maybe someone I worked with a while ago.
I think that's great. Yeah. So how would you move someone that's listening or watching to action today? They've tapped into this resource because there's something going on. How would
Sure.
you encourage them to pick up that 1,000-pound phone or whatever? But what would your call to action be for somebody?
Well, I always like people to. I like to challenge people's reality. Is we know this, doing nothing doesn't work. And if what you're doing, if things are slowly getting better and seriously getting better in your household, well, I can understand you wanting to think about it, but that's not generally how this goes. What we see is this progressive deterioration in a person's health and in their emotional state, in their ability to take care of themselves. They're functioning at a lower level. If that's the trend you're looking at, you have every right to expect that things are going to get a lot worse. And of course, there's all kinds of potential consequences as to what that can look like. So as scary as it might seem, I would suggest picking up the phone and talking to a couple of interventionists and getting some guidance to just get you through I mean, that's, like you said, it's that 10,000-pound telephone. That's the hardest part. The interesting part is, though, once somebody does pick up that phone, all sorts of interesting things tend to fall in place. I call it providence. And just making that decision to finally do something, the people that need to show up and the things that need to happen are going to happen. I've watched it happen thousands of times for families like that. So what I would encourage somebody to do is, there's no harm in making a phone call. There's no harm in getting some information. If you feel like you have some decisions to make, they should be informed decisions. And so that would be your first step, is get some information and some understanding so that you can start to get past that overwhelming part, because it's all overwhelming. But once you pick up the phone and start to talk to somebody, we start, kind of clearing a pathway for people. That's our job.
Giving hope to a hopeless,
Absolutely.
hopeless situation. Do you ever coach families along that maybe they don't want to necessarily have you there or hire you to be there, but would you coach people up to that day?
I have. Sometimes
how does that usually work out?
Well, sometimes it's actually worked out, but what I'll tend to do is refer them to a couple books, so you can get some more information. I think it's kind of a slippery slope, consulting with a family on doing an intervention, which I think if you've got somebody that's resistant to treatment, it's always best to have a professional there with you to get you over the ditches and the bumps and so forth. So I'd be a little bit hesitant to say, hey, here's what you do. Because then I'd feel responsible, and of course, without that guidance, the anxiety level tends to be higher in families, and they tend to go sideways a lot. So, but I will refer them to some books, and so they can decide whether or not they're ready. I have in the past done that. A couple of them worked out, a couple of them didn't, but it would be something I would avoid today.
Yeah, it's not ideal, because when another figure comes in that's not a family member, it diffuses things, because you're showing, hey, your family's going to get help. We want you to get help.
Right.
This is a two-sided thing. It's not about you. It's about the addiction and all those kind of things too. So if people want to reach out to you and connect with you, how would they do that?
You can find me online on my website that hasn't been updated in a bit, but we're working on it. And certainly, I don't know, do you put my phone number out
Yeah,
there?
I'll put all your contact info. So just go ahead and give it out audibly and let
Yeah,
people hear it too
sure.
if you want.
Oh, my phone number, my cell phone's the best way to reach me. It's 949-903-3008. That's always the best way to reach me. If somebody doesn't get me directly, leave a message. I'll always get back to you that day just as soon as I can.
Well, I appreciate your time today just to share
Sure.
your history and your expertise. And I know this resource will be huge for families to understand the broader scope of what does this process really look like. And then, as you said a few minutes ago, interviewing a couple interventionists, like to figure out, like if you want your kids to go to a certain school, you want to interview
Sure.
a couple schools to make sure you like it. So, it is a connection piece too,
Mm-hmm.
along with the family. So definitely look more into what Burr has to offer. Your expertise has been amazing, and I just really appreciate your time today.
Yeah, thanks so much, Rob. I love what you're doing, and as soon as this is over, I'm going to call you. I want to hear how you thought it went. Right? Is that cool?
That's awesome. All right,
Yeah.
well, I'm gonna stop the recording here. Give me a second.